with our guests by entering your comments into the Facebook section of our comment section on Hawaii News Now.
And we have two guests joining us now. The first one is a familiar guest to those of you who do watch the show, Dr. Chip Fletcher, who is the Dean at the UH Manoa School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology, is here with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Yenji.
It's always good to see you. Your organization making a lot of headlines this week with a study that came out about flooding in Waikiki along the Alawai, what this could mean for our community. I want to get to that. We will be talking about the Trump cuts and what it means for science overall. But let's start with that study. What did you find?
So we found that a situation that is already occurring, which is at high tide, when it rains, certain areas in Waikiki lose their gravity-based drainage, or in other words, the water has nowhere to drain. What we found was by 2050, this expands to almost 3/4 of Waikiki, which was much sooner than we had thought. By mid-century 2050, we're projecting, and in fact, international scientists are projecting 1 to 2 feet of sea level rise. Hawaii is experiencing and will experience more than the global average rate of sea level rise, about 15% more. So we are going to see the effects of sea level rise sooner and harsher. And our study found that stormwater drains, everybody knows that we have a gutter along every road, and every now and then, once or twice a block, there's a grate. Underneath that steel grate is a culvert, which is a big box, and that culvert then empties into a pipe. Well, most of those pipes take water, rainwater, and send it to the Alawai, which is a heavily polluted body of water. There are signs all over the Alawai: do not fish here or eat the fish, do not swim here. And as sea level rises, Alawai water comes up those drainage pipes into the culvert and out of the grate onto the street. This is called storm drain backflow. And our study found that by just 25 years from now, plus or minus a decade, and don't forget the minus part, it could be 10 years sooner, the ability for this system, which has been in there for over 100 years, to drain rainwater away, fails across most of Waikiki and is replaced with this noxious Alawai water flowing up.
We actually do have a rendering or a projection of what that could essentially look like, and we want to bring that up here to be able to talk through what exactly we're seeing, and I think some of it is what you've already explained.
Yeah, so this is the SOAST Coastal Viewer or Climate Viewer. It is my research team at SOAST studying multiple aspects of sea level rise. There's coastal erosion, of course. There are seasonal waves that will flood the coast more and more as sea level rises. And one of our very special modeling results is the water table. In fact, to my knowledge, our community and my research team is the only team in the world that models this many different impacts of sea level rise. The groundwater phenomenon is an important one because it turns out that the water table under our coastal communities rises and falls with the tides, meaning that we know it's connected to the ocean. And as the ocean rises from climate warming, from atmospheric warming, the water table will rise. And we installed some monitoring wells paid for by the city, the Board of Water Supply, and we know where the water table is throughout this area, and it's only a couple of feet below the land surface. And during a king tide, we get king tides twice a year. We have one coming up here pretty soon. The water table is really only a foot or two below the land surface, and so we only need 1 or 2 feet of sea level rise for these areas to become wetlands. Wetlands under roads, of course, causes them to fail. Wetlands under buildings is not a good thing. Wetlands in any urban area is a big problem.
So when we're looking at that map and thinking about, that is the crown jewel of Hawaii's tourism market. Without that, our economy, we know, would suffer greatly, not to mention all of the families who live there and all the people who work there, and of course what it means for our community sort of on a larger scale. But just from a purely economic standpoint, we have to invest in preventing this. Is that actually possible? Knowing that we're going to experience sea level, we can't stop sea level rise. What can we do to mitigate the effects that we saw on that map?
Well, you touched on an important point there, which is we cannot stop sea level rise. Scientists at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in their most recent report, gave high confidence to the statement that sea level rise will continue for centuries to millennia. And so, even if we stop our greenhouse gas emissions today, the ice of the world is still in an atmosphere. It's surrounded by air that is too hot. So that ice will take a long time to melt. Think of if I put an ice cube on the table in front of me, or I put a great big block of ice. The ice cube will melt right away. The block of ice may still be here, hours from now, melting away. Well, our glaciers are giant blocks of ice that will take centuries to melt. Also, the oceans are thermally expanding as they absorb heat from the atmosphere, and the oceans are massive. They have a current system called the conveyor belt, and so as the surface waters of the ocean thermally expand with warming from the air, they then convey down to the abyss, and they travel around the seafloor, and that takes 1,800 to 2,400 years, thermally expanding the whole way. So sea level rise is a permanent, unstoppable, accelerating reality in our lives, and our systems of management and policy for our shorelines around the world and in Hawaii are not ready for it. And I'm not saying that our government officials are doing nothing. Actually, I'm very proud of our government here in Hawaii, our county and our state government. They are embracing this as a reality, and they are working hard on trying to figure out solutions.
What are some of those solutions? I mean, when you look at that map, it not only includes, of course, Waikiki, as Yanji said, an important part of our economic driver of tourism, but other areas of Kaka'ako. We saw the airport also was included in that, parts of Chinatown as well. I mean, these are areas where local people are living. It's going to impact everyday people. What are some of those solutions look like in reality based on where we're at with the timeline and how much money is being allocated by the government to be able to combat some of these issues?
Great question. So I think the solutions are different depending on if we're talking about 1 or 2 feet of sea level rise over the next 25 to 35 years, or are we talking about 4 to 6 feet of sea level rise over the next 75 years, in other words, at the end of the century. In the first case, 1 to 2, maybe even 3 feet of sea level rise, we can raise roads, we can re-engineer our drainage system so that it's not based on gravity, but that it's based on pumps. My understanding is that Ala Moana Center, the parking area, actually has pumped drainage already because it's so low. And Miami Beach actually has large pumps on several blocks, and they've re-landscaped the blocks so that the roads tilt that way and the sidewalks tilt that way. And when it rains or when the water table comes up, it flows towards a pump, and the pump pumps it into Biscayne Bay. These pumps are very expensive, and of course you're re-landscaping the road and the sidewalk. There's also discussion about raising buildings or maybe waterproofing the ground floor, getting rid of the ceiling in the ground floor so that you have a lot more space, and moving all of your infrastructure in the building, your HVAC system, your electrical system, your backup electrical, all up to the roof or up to an upper floor so that when flooding occurs, it's not damaging. And in between flooding events, heavy rain events, king tides, life can go on. That's for 1 or 2 feet of sea level rise.
That is expensive. It sounds pretty intimidating, and you're talking about 2050, which you said plus or minus 10 years. The minus is what gives me pause. And so, how are we getting on this?
Yeah, we're working hard on it. So, talking about Waikiki, the city and county of Honolulu has just completed a risk profile study in which they take all of our sea level modeling, and they also look at other risks like earthquakes and tsunami, etc., hurricane, storm surge. They quantify these, and now that we know the threats and the risk by 2050, the question that the sort of study moves to the engineers and the architects who design resiliency. What are we going to do about the roads? What should we do about the buried freshwater pipes and sewage pipes? What do we do about the electrical grid? What do we do about individual buildings? What about open space? All of these are sort of sectors that have their own solutions. And, we've mentioned multiple types of sea level impact: coastal erosion, wave inundation, rainwater not being able to drain away, groundwater rising. Each of these requires their own solution, their own engineering and architectural response.
I want to also just kind of circle back to how we began this, talking about Waikiki specifically and the status of the Alawai, because we've seen in years past where even with just a few hours of rain, how quickly that has built up and caused problems and damages already in the Waikiki area. How important does the Alawai play, just that region and its status and what's happening there, into just not only what's happening, 25 years from now, but currently where we stand and it stands right now?
Yeah, the Alawai is a problem. You may not realize it, but the drainage system for almost everywhere from Diamond Head to Pearl Harbor, Ivalai, all the areas in Kaka'ako, they all drain to a canal. The city was designed on the concept that you bury these pipes and they flow to canals. Now, most of these canals are still dry stream beds, but the ocean does come up them in many places and will lead to flooding. The Alawai is heavily polluted. Is that what we are going to allow to happen in all the other canals that are simply stream beds right now and not yet flooded by the ocean? I think that'd be a horrible idea, of course. The Alawai problem is a watershed problem. It's an ahupua'a problem. We need to deal with the with what the city calls a one water issue. All types of water, rainwater to wastewater to pollution, from the ridge all the way down to the reef. And the city has a one water working group. They are dealing with this issue. So it's about the sources of pollution into the Alawai. It's not just the Alawai itself.
This research that we are now, that the city is using as a tool to act on, I'm sure there was federal funding, I would guess, that went into helping to create this research. And that's part of why we invited you on today, to talk about the funding cuts and the priorities that we're seeing coming out of the Trump administration on climate, on energy. Talk a little bit about the impacts that your school, the dean of SOAS, as we had mentioned, what you've experienced so far and what you see coming down the line, and what that means for research here in Hawaii.
Yeah, thank you, Yunji. This is a huge area that we are all very afraid of, very concerned. So I collected some numbers before coming here today. Currently, the University of Hawaii as a total has had about $83 million in grants stopped out or terminated. This is 73 federally sourced grants and about 55 FTEs or positions affected. Now, this doesn't mean people have lost their jobs, but it may also mean, and probably means in most cases, they've been moved over to other grants that are still in existence. Now, my school, SOAS, we've lost $36 million in federal grants. This is 17 grants. These grants dealt with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, of course, I think it was the first executive order he signed outlawing that. They deal with renewable energy, and of course the justification for renewable energy research is climate change, among others. And so we lost millions, maybe 15 million, in clean energy research grants from the Department of Energy, also from the Office of Naval Research, that were working synchronously with the Hawaii State Energy Office, and helping this state move away from dependency on external sources of energy and becoming energy independent. We also, of course, lost grants on sea level rise modeling, building community resiliency. All of these words, environmental conservation, sea level rise, climate change, resilience, these are now outlawed terms. And I can tell you that my team is now writing grants for funding, and we have one grant that looks like it's going to be accepted to continue modeling sea level rise, but Guess what? We don't call it sea level rise. We call it coastal flooding. So one answer to your question is people are figuring out how to work around the system. Now, the big fear is the FY26 federal budget. And right now, the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee for CJM, I think it's called, it's where science and climate are, the budgets for these agencies are determined, CJS, Commerce, Justice, and Science. It turns out that these, both the House and Senate Appropriations Committees and CJS are there are senators and representatives that are Republican that are as irritated as the Democrats to the loss of NASA, to the loss of the National Science Foundation, to the enormous budget cuts to the National Weather Service and various other NOAA programs. So the little bit of good news that we're hearing just in the last week or two is that these appropriation committees, the House and the Senate, are not interested in zeroing out the science budgets from these federal agencies. Now, we'll see. Trump obviously is, and so it'll be interesting to watch.
When you talk about some of these cuts that have already come through, what does that look like realistically on the ground for you? When they say funding is cutting or things are being reallocated, does that mean that funding for the next fiscal year stops, or does just money stop coming in and all of a sudden you have to adapt? Is there any time for you to prepare because money has already been allocated and budgeted and it's within your means to kind of then decide what happens? Or is it, like a faucet and it's just completely off and money just stops coming in altogether?
It's both. So some grants, the faucet was turned off. An email was sent, very terse email. This is to inform you that your funding has been stopped out. And they may say something like, please submit your final invoices and do this within the next 4 days, and then that's the end. At that point, so as dean, I've asked all of my principal investigators, all of my faculty, if you have been stopped out and you have people whose jobs are threatened, please let us know. If you have graduate students or undergraduates whose support has been lost or is threatened, please let us know. The same request has gone out from the Vice President for Research for the UH system. The Office of Research Services is where grants and grant money comes and goes and flows into and out of the university. They are involved from the beginning. So the typical case is that the question is, can you move these people to another grant? And I'll tell you, here in SOAST, we've been extremely lucky because our researchers often have multiple grants. We've been able to move our science staff and our students who are supported onto other grants. So for now, things are holding steady. It's not a catastrophe. We'll be watching, though. Next year certainly could be a catastrophe.
I'm interested if you could tie it back to why this matters to the average person who's watching this program. They're sitting at home right now. We just saw this catastrophic rain event in Texas and all the deaths associated with that, and the warning systems that either worked or didn't. And I know there will probably be congressional hearings about how that all played out. When we look at major rain events here in Hawaii, we know that there are dangers that people are, that there are rain events that could put people in danger. So I'm curious to know, you mentioned NOAA cuts. What kind of cuts are you most concerned about? And what does it mean to the average person who may not work at the university, who may not be a climate scientist?
Yes, it may not appear very moving to a person who's not at the university to hear about what's happening. But I have to say that, most of our government policies are science-based policies. What roads look like, how you build roads, what are the safety precautions that you put into designing new buildings, how are we retrofitting buildings to be safer in a world with stronger winds associated with hurricanes and sea level rise and hotter air and growing wildfire threat because of those. Without science doing the sort of out there in front, leading the way with knowledge, then our world becomes less safe, it becomes less just, it becomes less resilient. And I don't know if everybody out there believes in climate change, but I can tell you I have staked my entire career on the truth of climate change. And climate change is worse than you're being told, and it's coming at us faster than you're being told. So losing science means a threat to the safety and the functionality of individuals and our communities. It's critically important that the university, especially here in Hawaii, maintain this role, because we do not have a science agency. Most states have a science agency, and ours, our hydrologic science is in the Commission on Water Resource Management and DLNR. But all the rest of the science has to be done by university researchers or consultants who are trained at the university. Then you have science teachers. The university trains these science teachers. It's everywhere, actually, when you think about it. And the fact that this is threatened actually scares me to the point where I almost wonder, is our president trying to push us back into some primitive stage that, our life expectancy was less, disease had greater impact, weather events were not as bad as they are now. So that's going to be something that's going to be far worse than it would be otherwise if we were to continue to fund science.
Well, when you look at, and you have these conversations that many online engage in, and I'm sure we will see some throughout this program as well, about climate change and those opinions of what people believe to be true or not. And they challenge science with this. The fact is, though, that there are storms, there are hurricanes, there are events that have happened and will continue to happen. And some of those cuts to the science community include, as we've mentioned, NOAA, other weather service communities, other government agencies that really care for and monitor weather patterns and such. So beyond just believing in climate change or not, cuts to these other programs, I believe, I would imagine, would impact your community as well. And so while you're saying that your department's looking for ways to make up some of the shortfall, there's this other science community that maybe won't be able to find that. How do the cuts to these other government agencies that are tracking storms impact you folks directly? And is there a way for you folks to help assist that if some of these other programs get cut?
Yeah, so the National Weather Service is an amazing organization. These are incredibly smart people who are working for the betterment of our communities. They are crushed every time there is a health issue associated with a heat wave, or there are fatalities associated with floods, because it means that they haven't achieved what their mission is, or what they aspire to, which is to make the world safe for us, given the increase in hazardous weather. So we work carefully with the National Weather Service. In fact, at the Manoa campus, the National Weather Service has an office in one of our SOST buildings. And many of the people who staff the National Weather Service got their degrees in SOST from our Department of Atmospheric Sciences. We use the National Weather Service to teach. It's not just a one-way avenue from our classroom into the National Weather Service. The National Weather Service is actually in our classrooms and holding, having internships and holding seminar and workshops on how they work. So they are a critical element to the education mission and the service mission at the university, and we are a critical element to their job as well.
Research is cumulative, right? One researcher finds something, and then another person builds on that. We know that. So when these grants are stopped, when these cuts are happening, when these young researchers don't get to do the work and make the discoveries that could potentially help deal with those flood inundation maps that we're looking at, I'm curious to hear from you what is lost.
Yeah, we're speaking more and more about generational loss to the science infrastructure of the United States. I understand hundreds, if not thousands, of people at the National Science Foundation have been riffed or have lost their jobs. The National Science Foundation building has been turned over to some other function, and those folks are what used to be part of a big building is now relegated to one floor or more. The amount of damage that has been done by the present administration is not going to be easily recovered. Should we have an administration that follows the current administration that embraces science, they're going to probably spend their entire 4 years trying to rebuild just a piece of what has been lost in the meantime. And I know that it's easy for folks to think that the government is too big, it's too bloated. It's good that we are reducing the expense of government, the size of government. That's all great until a flood wipes out your community. It's all great until a hurricane runs aground in downtown Honolulu, like Hurricane Lane almost did. We actually need to keep these systems of people and research and prediction moving forward, well-funded, doing the latest and best work that they can. Otherwise, it's going to cost human lives. And we've just seen the first event, Texas. There are heat waves that are, we had a huge heat wave in the central and eastern U.S. last month where we lost hundreds of people. These things need government agencies to predict their location and their intensity in order for communities to help protect the citizens that they serve.
Looking here locally, again, with your program in your department, is there anything that funds can be raised in other means through state help, through philanthropy, through fundraising? I mean, in order to keep some of this going, do you see seeking other avenues of funding beyond just what the federal government provides?
Yeah, we've certainly started looking much harder at philanthropy. That's going to be an important and growing source of funding for us. There are just an amazing number of very generous, wonderful foundations out there that are concerned with what is happening at the federal level and want to help. There are individuals here in Hawaii and elsewhere that are concerned and want to help. So philanthropy is filling in some of the gaps that have opened up. Plus, as I said, we're slowly learning how to deal with the federal requirements, and I think some of our funding may be turned back on. And the rest is optimism that the appropriation committees at the House and Senate are going to not allow this devastation that the administration wants to see happen.
You know, I'm looking at some of the comments, and some of the folks are just asking, why can't you use state funds to backfill some of this? We know that the green fee was just passed. We're looking at $100 million in money that is going to be coming in, projected on an annual basis. What are your thoughts about using some of that money towards this, or should that be allocated to other priorities as intended?
Well, the green fee is an amazing event. It's one of a kind. It is a large interjection of funding for all of the resiliency building projects that have been underfunded in the past. There are so many nonprofits out there and watershed groups, watershed alliances that are going to be funded with this money to, continue to arrest the spread of invasive species, to stop soil erosion, to convert our lands back to more sustainable ecosystems. Right on down to the coastline, I expect to see dune restoration projects and beach conservation projects, and all the way out to the reefs. So the green fee is intended to build resilience that will reduce the devastation of the next major weather event. And I think it's critically important that it be applied for that purpose, because that's the purpose that the legislature defined for it.
I kind of want to reverse and go back to talking about how some of what we're seeing now in these cuts could impact the future of the science community and directly the students that you get to work with and that enter this school and this department. Have you seen any changes in those who are interested in this industry or interested in this community moving forward? Has there been any impacts to enrollment or interest? Because people may not see a future with this industry for long. How are you seeing any impact, and what do you think overall for the future scientists who maybe want to enter this field?
It's a great question. I think it's a little early. I mean, we just got our enrollment numbers in my school for this coming fall semester. They are down about 5 individuals compared to time last year. Campus-wide at Manoa, we're looking at an 8% increase compared to this time last year. So that's amazing news. That's fantastic news. So it's too early to tell to give an accurate answer to that question.
I want to ask about, you've been pretty vocal today about your feelings about the priorities of this administration, but there have been reports, particularly because in the sciences we deal with folks who are coming internationally, right? And so there was a researcher who was quoted in the New York Times, says was here in Hawaii, moving back to England, and he said he only felt safe speaking out because he's moving back. Mm-hmm. Tell us about sort of the political climate of speaking out in this time.
Well, that's a great question also. And going back to the student enrollment, we are seeing big drops, like 30% drops in international students. And that's a direct reflection of the Trump administration and their work with regard to immigration and international students. With regard to speaking out, I think now we're beginning to feel comfortable about speaking out. Certainly for the last 6 months, beginning in February, and for a few months thereafter, I think we're all very hesitant to speak out. In fact, I know that's a fact. I had an op-ed that I submitted on climate change and how it's a scientific reality, not a political attitude, and I retracted it. Like, I submitted it, it was accepted, and I said, you know what, I'm changing my mind. I'm putting myself too much at risk. Please let me have that back. And I'm someone who feels very passionate about public education and speaking out on the issue of climate change. So that's an example for you that, yes, in fact, we have been hesitant. But I think it's loosening up a little bit, as my presence on your program today testifies.
Well, we are almost out of time, but before we let you go, oftentimes we have these conversations, and it often seems like doom or gloom. We started off talking about flooding and what happens with this, all these changes, sea level rises and things of such. What is your encouragement to viewers out there who are a bit nervous about what's happening to the community, but also what's happening along our shorelines?
Well, I would not. How do I phrase this? I and my family are in Hawaii, and I would not rather be anywhere else in our uncertain future. I think Hawaii has the political framework and is showing true commitment to making our future safer. It has the indigenous ethical framework, which allows us to, aloha aina, develop relationships with place through time. And we have leaders that are focused on our safety from a scientific basis. So the key thing for us to do in Hawaii is to become independent. We are too dependent on external sources of energy and external supply lines. I am worried that supply lines will sever more and more frequently, and so we need to make sure that our economy is self-sufficient. I imagine a future where our tourism industry is composed to a large extent of people traveling here to see how we did it. Like, we have a possibility to show the world what it means to thrive even as the world is changing in dangerous ways. And I'm confident that we can do that.
I love that optimism. I love ending there. Thank you so much, Dr. Fletcher, for joining us today. We're going to be talking about how these cuts impact the astronomy community here in Hawaii and what that means globally. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Hello and welcome back to Spotlight Now as we continue on our conversation of how scientists and research programs here in the state of Hawaii have been impacted by cuts coming from the federal level.
There are cuts that have already happened and a number of cuts that are pending. To break it down and what it means for the astronomy community here in Hawaii, we have welcome in now Dr. Doug Simons, who's the director of the UH Institute for Astronomy, all the way from Hilo. Thank you for being here with us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Chip laid out what it means for climate science and the school that he is the dean of. We are looking at, I got some numbers from your team, 47% to NASA science budget cut, 55 to National Science Foundation. What does that mean for astronomy here in Hawaii?
Potentially devastating is the short answer. To give you context, those sorts of cuts are the largest proposed in the histories of NSF and NASA. Nothing even close. It's not unusual for incoming administrations to tweak budgets by 5 to 10% or adjust priorities. For example, President Obama made green technologies an NSF priority when he started his term. But these are completely unprecedented and have kind of been an earth-shaking event for science across the board. I'll talk about astronomy with you today, but bear in mind that these agencies, particularly NSF, hit so many different areas of science. It has enjoyed bipartisan support since its beginning, including the most difficult, political eras. Generally speaking, they've always had good support. I've worked with NSF for over 20 years, and it's a huge impact on them already. So it's something to keep in mind that in terms of cuts, these are like 5 times, maybe 10 times bigger than we've seen on a typical administrative proposed budget.
When we're talking about some of these cuts, how specifically are they impacting this science community with the various telescopes that we have here in the state of Hawaii, both on Hawaii Island as well as on Maui? What does that translate to when you're looking at some of these more specific telescopes and areas in which the University of Hawaii is also involved in?
Yeah, that's right. So just to give you a little more detail, Keck Observatory is proposed to receive about a 17% cut, i.e. their NASA contribution be zeroed out in the proposed FY26 budget from the administration. The net budget impact on Gemini, because they're an international association and they have other international contributors, about 25%. The worst one that I'm aware of is DKIST on Maui, and this one is really troubling, as if the others aren't. Basically looking at a 50% cut. So DKIST is a one-of-a-kind, $400 million, 100% U.S. taxpayer facility, best solar telescope ever built. Incredible engineering that went in. They're just starting science operations, brand new. So the logic of potentially terminating that project, they haven't declared that they would. But the risk of that kind of loss, the inevitable type of impact to DKIST with a 50% cut is kind of mind-boggling. So those are areas in which there's clearly a huge risk. If there's a silver lining, and this is what I was particularly worried about when I started to hear these rumblings, NASA protected their planetary defense program. That program sponsors 8 UH telescopes in Hawaii and around the world, and is a huge contributor to our budget as well. So if they had actually cut that would have been just absolutely devastating to the Institute for Astronomy.
That said, those kinds of cuts, I mean, can your institute weather that storm?
We'll have to see what comes out of the final appropriation from Congress. About 2/3 of my budget is NASA and NSF. The rest is state. So we have about a $30 million annual budget. So $20 million comes from NASA and NSF. So cut that in half to zero order, you're looking at sort of a $10 million potential impact on our budget. So that's obviously huge, right? That's kind of a worst case scenario. Amongst the near-term impacts that I'm most concerned about are our graduate students. We have about 40 graduate students. In fact, just before I was here, I was attending a thesis defense for one of our students in solar astronomy. They are almost all on NASA and NSF funding through grants. And they leverage the future like nothing else we do, in my opinion, at the Institute for Astronomy, because each of these graduate students will go on to 40, 50 years of career. They'll leverage funding through grants, they'll do research, they'll bring on their own students over time, they'll develop technologies over the course of this century. And that investment is huge when you add it up over time. So my immediate concern when I heard about these potential cuts was to kind of circle the wagon around our grads if we have to.
I'm imagining, because as you talk about having to defend and hopefully maintain some level of these fundings, that you're having these conversations with, the congressional delegation, or trying to help them provide information to their own colleagues. I mean, what are some of, like those? What are some of the conversations like that you're having to try to help provide information to defend some of these programs and services that you provide?
Right. So I was in Washington in May and had the opportunity to talk to several reps, including Rep. Tokuda, directly about these cuts. So our federal delegation is rock solid supporting astronomy in general. The reality is, though, we have a Congress that demonstrably follows the lead of the president. And I think that's the combination that has really had us concerned. If the demonstrated behavior of this Congress, which is to just follow the lead of the president, these 50% cuts are real, right? Recent news suggests that Senate and Congress actually pushing, or the House and Congress starting to push back. So there's some hope there. And we won't know really at the soonest until the end of September, the end of this fiscal year. But in any case, the feedback I get from our federal delegation is super strong. I'm in touch with all of our Hawaii Island delegation, super strong support there. What I've tried to do, and as I mentioned to you, this is like my 10th interview, raise awareness and drive advocacy. And if people are upset about this, for example, you can go to the Mauna Kea Observatory's website, click on a couple buttons, and you can find federal and local political officials to voice your concerns about this. Because if the people don't support astronomy, it's going to be in a vulnerable state. So that's what I'm trying to do: get the word out, and if there's support in the community, let that support be known.
And from, sort of the layman's perspective, if you're not a researcher, if you're not a scientist, if you're just a person, who lives in Hawaii, why should you care about these funding cuts? Why do they matter to the average person?
Right. So particularly so on Hawaii Island. Let me give you some numbers because the population is so large on Oahu compared to Hawaii Island. There are about 600 jobs directly associated with Mauna Kea Observatory, so employees from them. The annual budget of the Mauna Kea Observatories is about $70 to $80 million a year. That is aggregated from international funders all over the world, so injected directly into the economy there. Most of that money goes into the economy through the salaries of our staffs at the observatories. I'm fairly certain that the Mauna Kea Observatory is the #1 provider of STEM jobs on the island. So these are the typical, I'd say the median salary is probably about $110,000 per year. So pretty good paying jobs. On Maui, there are several hundred more. So overall, about 1,000 jobs directly driven by astronomy. About 1,400 when you do the math and the economic impact. $220 million worth of economic impact annually in the state, 110 on Hawaii Island. So this is starting to get comparable to forestry and agriculture, et cetera. You pull the plug on Hawaii Island astronomy, I'm fairly certain that in Waimea, astronomy is the #1 employer between CFHT and Keck. So it's a big deal, and you will know that when it's gone, and that's the situation we don't want to get into, right?
Let's talk about one of the projects that has, of course, garnered a lot of attention over the last few years, and that's the 30-meter telescope. There was continuing to be discussions over the past decade or so about what the future looks like for this project, noting that there are these cuts that are happening with the NSF. How does that impact the future moving forward with the 30-meter telescope, regardless of political positioning and what clearance gets, the funding source of this? How is this impacting the project overall?
Yeah, it's a shame. Obviously, I'm a big TMT supporter, and it represents the future of Hawaii astronomy in various ways. It was kind of an interesting component of the release of the budget that there's a statement that basically said of the two big telescopes, the GMT going to Chile and TMT in Hawaii, TMT was not going to be allowed to go forward in what we call final design review in the NSF process. Very interesting in the sense that I will say TMT had proposed to do that at no cost. So they are valiantly working ahead to try and find a way to get TMT back on the rails. A lot of effort going on in Washington right now. Again, probably my #1 question, what's going on with TMT? They're still alive, they're still pressing forward, but obviously this doesn't help when you have a statement like that made by the NSF.
I'm curious, sort of similar to what I was asking Dr. Fletcher, that research is cumulative. When we think about innovations in astronomy and how those apply to our everyday lives, what do you tell people about why astronomy is important, even if you never look into a telescope yourself?
So there's so many technology spin-offs that people don't necessarily aren't necessarily aware of, and that's just sort of the nature of it all. So, for example, I will pull out my cell phone. This technology is in large part due to astronomy. So I used my Google GPS map because I wasn't quite sure how to get here, to get from the Institute for Astronomy to your studios. The fiducial reference, the spatial reference for supporting GPS, turns out that's about 200 supermassive black holes that are essentially 90% back in the history of the universe that we monitor. Why is that? Because they're so far away, they're believed, for all practical purposes, to be fixed in the sky. Everything you measure is relative in the universe. That set of reference points, the supermassive black holes that astronomy has measured precisely and monitors, that maps into essentially all measurement positions on Earth. It's not obvious, right? But when you pull up your iPhone like I do, you're actually tapping into that database. Astronomy is central to quantum mechanics as well. I just Googled it before I came in. Give or take 20 to 30% of the gross domestic product of the United States, that's about $10 trillion, is attributable to quantum mechanics, that one field, that one theory in physics that's about 100, 120 years old. That has astronomy as its basis. It takes time, to your point about being cumulative. Subtract out that amount of GDP, subtract out science, and all of a sudden it's a really big deal.
This may be more of a Hollywood question because when you think of space, you think of all these scientific movies and, just the protection of Earth itself. And you hear of these scientists who are tracking the skies and looking out there. And there is reality to that there are people who are constantly out there looking to see what may potentially impact our planet and what's happening. Do any of these types of cuts impact any of that, of what's just looking out into space and ensuring the safety of planet Earth, not only necessarily here local, because this is something that's impacting the entire, community of astronomers. How much of that will be impacted by this?
Yeah, great question. That's why I hinted that if there's a silver lining, the NASA Planetary Defense Program was essentially unscathed in the proposed cuts. I'm super proud that at the Institute for Astronomy, our program is the number one source of detecting what we call near-Earth objects, potential impactors. These are detected almost every night in different ways between PanSTARRS, which are 2 telescopes who operate on Haleakala, the ATLAS program, which is 5 telescopes scattered around the world. ATLAS basically is our last line of defense. It will detect, in principle, anything coming in about 72 hours out in advance. Why is that important? We can very accurately predict the impact point of a potential impactor on Earth a day or two out. You can't stop it, but you can evacuate if it's in a area that's populated. So that technology is here. It's been demonstrated. You may recall a week or so ago the interstellar asteroid. The word Atlas is in the name now. That's because it was discovered by a UH-operated telescope called the Atlas program.
Yeah, and Ryan, to Ryan's point, that these are, that this happens on an international scale, right? We have researchers from all over the world who come and who use these facilities. I'm interested what you're hearing from your international counterparts about what's happening in the U.S. and what their concerns are.
This is a G-rated show, so I won't share all of the comments that I've had showered on me. Bewilderment, consternation, confusion. Those are the things that I detect from my international partners. You had Chip on earlier. I think the climate within UH is still pretty good. We're aware of it. When I talk to folks on the east side, east coast of the U.S., for example, Harvard, which is basically under attack, they are afraid. It's a much more difficult situation for them than we have right here. So it varies depending on your local situation. But the knock-on effect in terms of our ability to sustain a highly internationalized field of science like astronomy is doubtless one of the big lasting problems that we're going to have to deal with.
And just to sort of recap, I mean, maybe again, just kind of speak to the importance that this program plays within the University of Hawaii at Hilo specifically, because we know that it is a big part of the overall college itself, and those who are employed by it and those who continue to do this research, both in Hilo but also on Mauna Kea. How much of an impact would this have to the entire school of the astronomy program within the University of Hawaii at Hilo?
Yeah, so IFA has actually 3 facilities. Our largest building is here at Manoa. Then we have about a 20,000 square foot building, Pukalani, Maui, and then the IFA Hilo. So it's a distributed program overall. But the knock-on effect, like I said, could be with a reduced number of telescopes on the summit because they cannot operate anymore. We get about 10 to 15% of the observing time on all the telescopes on Mauna Kea. It's an incredible wealth of research potential. That is basically the bread and butter of the Institute for Astronomy. So the knock-on effect of that is we lose our capacity for graduate students because their stipends, their salaries, that's all funded through grant money that is driven by research that's driven by ultimately NASA and NSF. So lack of observing potential maps directly into a lack of research and education at the Institute.
We're almost out of time, but I know you encourage folks to go to your website and to get involved. You know, just sort of a final thought from you, is this a done deal? These cuts, 55% to NSF, 47% to NASA, those are proposed. Where do you think this goes?
Fingers crossed. Last week, as Chip mentioned, CGS out of the federal Senate appropriations pushed back, and basically they're proposing for flat budgets, which would be for me awesome. Flat looks great. And I thought it was actually today that the House Appropriations Committee is going to mark up the Senate markup. So we should know within a week or two. This is one of those classic necessary but insufficient conditions. We need support in the House and the Senate. Ultimately, we need to get this ball across the goal line with Congress altogether, with House and Senate floor votes as well. So, ask me after September 30th, and I'll know. If we go to a continuing resolution or just flat budgets, that would be awesome, in my opinion, compared to 50% cuts.
Wow. Okay. Dr. Simons, thank you so much for being
Sure
here
thing.
today. We appreciate all that you shared. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live. We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
First alert traffic is like always having a helpful passenger right next to you.
There's a crash up ahead in the left lane.
When we see a backup, we'll tell you live on TV
That doesn't look too good.
and send an alert to your phone.
I'll type, you drive.
First alert traffic on TV, streaming, and on the Hawaii News Now app.
Keeping you and your ohana safe.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Wright Kalei Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, we want to thank both of our guests that we had on the program today and really just giving us a realistic oversight of the things and challenges that their departments and their industries are dealing with these cuts that are coming down from the federal government. Some of them already imposed, some of them proposed, and you can hear from both of our guests that they are really fighting for what they believe is important.
Yeah, Dr. Fletcher sharing with us those maps at the top of the hour. If you missed any of that, make sure to go back and watch it. Very interesting to see what could happen to Waikiki Waikiki and really beyond downtown area as well, if sea level rise continues at its current clip and if things aren't done to address it. And also just hearing from Dr. Simons there about the federal funding cuts and what they're doing to fight. Next week, we will be focusing in on Waikiki from a different angle, talking about tourism.
That's why catching up with our tourism leaders in both aviation as well as hospitality and hotels that are going to be giving us an update on what they're seeing in the tourism industry. Always a great time having a conversation with you. We'll see you right back here next week, Tuesday. Aloha.
Aloha.